I should have never gone back to Stanton Wood. Not after what happened. But I couldn't help myself, I had to know if it was still there, watching. It all started a few months ago. I live in a small town, about an hour away from the nearest city. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the biggest event of the year is the town's 4th of July fireworks show. Life here is simple, predictable, and quiet. Or at least, it used to be. Stantonwood is a thick, ancient forest that borders our town. Kids are told never to go there after dark. It's not just because it's easy to get lost, but because Stanton has always had a reputation. People would talk about strange sounds, lights in the sky, and things moving in the shadows. Most of it was small-town folklore, stories told around campfires to scare the new kids. No one ever believed them, until now. One summer evening, a group of my friends and I were sitting around the fire pit in my backyard. We'd been drinking and telling old high school stories when someone brought up Stanton Wood. "Remember when we used to dare each other to go in there?" Brett said, grinning at the memory. "Yeah," Claire chimed in. "But none of us were ever brave enough to stay past midnight." "I did," said Jake, his voice low and serious. We all turned to him, surprised. Jake was never one to brag, but there was something different in his tone that night. Something unsettling. "You've never mentioned that before," I said, giving him a curious look. Jake stared into the flames for a moment before he spoke again. "That's because I saw something. And I promised myself I'd never go back." "What did you see?" Claire asked, leaning forward. He hesitated before answering. "I don't know what it was. But it wasn't human." The mood around the fire shifted immediately. The laughter and playful banter from earlier were gone, replaced by a thick, heavy silence. "You're joking, right?" Brett asked, though his voice lacked confidence. Jake shook his head. "I'm not. I wish I was." He told us that, a few years ago, he'd gone into Stantonwood on a dare, just like we used to. He said he walked deeper into the forest than any of us ever had, determined to prove he wasn't afraid. For the first few hours, it was just trees and darkness, but then he noticed something strange. The woods had gone silent, no crickets, no owls, no rustling leaves. It was as if the entire forest had stopped breathing. And then, he saw the lights. They were just floating there in the trees, he said. At first, I thought it was someone playing a trick, like maybe a drone or something. But the lights, they didn't move like anything I've ever seen before. They flickered and pulsed, like they were alive. "And then?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake's face was pale. "I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the forest. But as I was running, I heard something behind me, something moving through the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see it." We all sat in silence for a moment, letting his words sink in. I could tell from the look on everyone's faces that they were as freaked out as I was. Jake wasn't the kind of guy to make up stories, and he looked genuinely terrified. "You don't really believe that, do you?" Brett said, forcing a laugh. "Come on, man, you probably just spooked yourself. You were in the woods at night, and your mind played tricks on you." Jake didn't respond. He just stared at the fire, his jaw clenched tight. The conversation shifted after that, but no one really had the heart to keep up the light-hearted mood from before. One by one, people started to leave, and soon it was just me and Jake sitting by the dying fire. "Hey," I said, trying to break the tension. "You alright?" Jake looked at me, his eyes distant. "I can still hear it sometimes. When I'm trying to sleep. That sound from the woods." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off as a drunk story, something he made up after a few too many beers. But there was something about the way he said it that got under my skin. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what Jake had said. The idea that something might be lurking in Stantonwood, something not human, was ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, the more curious I became. So, against my better judgment, I decided to see for myself. That weekend, I packed a flashlight, some water, and a knife, just in case. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Part of me felt embarrassed that I was even entertaining the idea that there might be something out there. But another part of me needed to know if Jake was telling the truth. I waited until just before sunset, then drove out to the edge of Stanton Wood. As I walked into the forest, I tried to remind myself that it was all just a story. There was no such thing as aliens or monsters or whatever Jake thought he saw. It was probably just his imagination running wild in the dark. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, that creeping feeling of unease started to settle in. The trees seemed taller, the shadows longer. And then I noticed something else, the silence. Just like Jake had described, the usual sounds of the forest had faded away, leaving only the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I stopped for a moment, listening. There was nothing. No wind, no birds, not even the distant hum of cars from the highway. It was as if the world had been muted. I shined my flashlight around, but the beam barely cut through the dense darkness. And then I saw them, the lights. At first, they were faint, barely visible through the trees. But as I watched, they grew brighter, flickering and pulsing like some kind of living organism. There were at least 5 or 6 of them, hovering about 20 feet off the ground, just beyond the nearest trees. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. Then, I heard it. The sound. A low, humming noise, almost like the drone of machinery but more organic, more alive. It wasn't coming from the lights, though. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight shaking in my hand. For a split second, I thought I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, standing just at the edge of the light. But when I blinked, it was gone. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally stumbled out of the woods and back to my car, I was gasping for breath. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen, what I had just heard. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, there was no explanation. Jake was right. There was something in Stanton Wood, something not human. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those lights, heard that sound. I tried to forget, tried to push it out of my mind, but it kept coming back. I wasn't the only one, either. Word started to spread around town. Other people had seen the lights, too. People were hearing strange noises at night, things moving in the shadows. And then, people started disappearing. It started with animals, dogs, cats, livestock. But soon, it was people. First, it was an older man who lived on the outskirts of town. Then, a teenager who went for a run and never came back. The police searched, but they never found anything. No bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just, gone. I don't know what's out there in Stanton Wood. I don't know if it's aliens, or creatures, or something else entirely. But I do know one thing, they're watching us. They've always been watching. And now, they're getting closer.